Hello, welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. On an early Sunday morning, I have been working odd hours. Last night, Saturday night, I was out here at midnight working on the Street 55, trying to get it to stay out of the shop. I was hoping to be done with it Wednesday night. I had fixed a whole list of stuff up to that point, and I had the alignment figured out. That was going nice. The parking brake still didn't work. But Thursday, I drove it up to New Hampshire to visit my friend Charlie and put a distributor in the 71 Nova that I sold him, my gold project that we worked on here on the channel. It had a cell distributor. I put it somewhere with a Patronics conversion, and that unit smells burnt. So it quit running. I don't know who, what, when, or why. It just stopped. So he had bought a brand new Patronics distributor. We're both kind of disappointed in the current state of MSD products, so decided to do something different, and the Patronics unit would drop right in with the same plug wires because it looks like an old points distributor. So I drove up there, 55 completely untested, and made it up there no problem. We swapped out the distributor. I got to drive my Nova. Now I'm going to put a bunch of still pictures of the ones that I have at the end of this video, and I'll revisit most of them at some point, but it's already late, or getting late Sunday morning. I got a bunch of stuff I got to do, but I wanted to at least cover everything I've done to this point, if nothing else for me to watch in the future. So, and when I was done test driving the Nova, that was awesome. I've owned 5 Novas, I think. Never driven one of them. I had driven this one around the yard, but never on the road. Never even went around the block. I really didn't want to bring it back. See, the bench seat vertical shifter, that's pretty unique. It has the Chevy Performance 383 that I put a different cam and heads on, only because I didn't have them. All I had was a short block. And it's equivalent to the power level of my Blueprint 383 in the Street 55. So I got back and decided that the afternoon, most of the day was, taken up. I might as well see if I can make that parking brake work. So I removed this piece. If you remember, the Tri-5 Chevy parking brake has a couple of brackets bolted to the floor. Just has a notch in one of the brackets, and it pivots. There's a slot in the other bracket, so when you pull the cable that comes down out of the dash, it just moves the lever, and it pulls on this piece. Well, this piece is wore out anyway, half cut, this way from the bracket that the cable rides through. So I looked at it and thought, I have buckets full of Hirsch shifter rods. So I took one, you'll see it in the picture. I used the adjustable end that's normally near the shifter, went up through my bracket. I had to drill everything out to 3/8 because this was 5/16. So I went up a size, but everything fit. And the Hirsch rod had a threaded piece, so it worked out perfect. Well, the whole thing's threaded now. It's one threaded piece. It was an old piece of rod. Threw the threaded adapter up into my bracket, double nutted, on the other side of the pull piece for the cable. You can see it in the picture. And that gave me, this was out of adjustment, and I thought I was pretty close to making it work. The handle, because it's a handle, under the dash, comes out 3 or 4 inches, it gets tight, the car rolls away like there's nothing connected. So I also pulled the wheels back off, pulled the drums off, make sure there was the spreader bar and everything for the emergency brake. That all looks fine. I have converted, everything to 9-inch forward rear ends. I use the drum brake. I typically use Camaro Nova brake cables, but whatever this has, it's hooked up, it should work. I don't believe it's a drum issue. It's a stroke issue, I think. So, put it all back together. Still didn't work. So, the same time that afternoon, on the way back from New Hampshire, I wanted to put fuel in it. I've only fueled it a couple other times, and you have to absolutely trickle the fuel into it because it has an aftermarket fuel cell that has 3 connections on the top. It has the line that feeds the engine, it has a return port, and it has the rollover valve, which has a ball in it, so if the car rolled over, it would seal off the hole, but the rest of the time it's supposed to vent. They're all -8. You know, reasonable size. So the rollover valve is capped. So the only vent is to go up the fill tube while you're trying to put fuel in it. Modern day fuel snozzles, they don't like air coming back at them. It shuts the thing off. So, and it spits fuel everywhere. So I had an old piece of -8 line. I found a spot, bored a hole in the trunk. The trunk is not original. It's all just sheet metal. So no big deal. And in the process of that, I tightened up a few brackets and some rattles because everything's been rattling back there. And I figured this was a home run, right? What can possibly go wrong? And I park it up in the garage where I normally park it. It's attached to my house. Half an hour later, I can smell gas in the kitchen. Go outside, and the smell coming off the vent will drive you nuts. So I went and got the cap, put the cap back on, thinking this should not be a problem. But it is. So that is also unsolved. I think I'm going to, believe it or not, it runs fine. There's not a big fuel demand. There's a 3/8 line running to the engine. You know, I'm not racing or anything, or I'd be worried about having a big enough vent. I've had, every race car I've ever had would sit all day long in the shop. I fixed the roll cage on my orange car with my front mounted fuel cell full of, 116 or 20 octane fuel with a -8 vent, and it never even smelled. Why does this car stink so bad? I mean, it's so bad you can't work on it here. Even in this giant shop, it'll fill the shop full of fumes that quick. Nothing's leaking on the car. So, to temporarily solve this, I'm going to put a shutoff valve in line, so it'll be off most of the time when it's parked in a garage. And anytime I'm going to fuel it, I'll just have to open the vent up. So I'm hoping, I haven't actually tried fueling it with the vent hooked up, but I'm going to assume it's going to be a better experience. But that is odd. I mean, granted, the race car didn't run on 87 octane and pump gas. Race gas smells better, but you'd still smell it. And I would have been afraid to weld on the car and everything with the levels of fumes that I'm getting out of this -8 vent. I mean, your typical fuel cell fuel tank in like a square body Chevy before they went to the charcoal canister had a 3/8 rear end vent in it. So if it's a 3/8 hose, -8's only one size bigger, right? So I don't know. It's like you're sitting next to a pool of gas. So that's done. The parking brake. This morning, I decided, that on that bracket, I had put the hole that this goes in close to the pivot like it was from the factory. Because this stuff worked from the factory. Kind of. I mean, they eventually redesigned it because this was not the hot setup. I moved it out on the pivot. I drilled another hole further out, closer to the cable that's pulling on it. I moved it over 1.5 inches, hopefully to give myself more leverage. It's like it's not even hooked up. I back it out, set the parking brake, it just rolls away. And so that continues to be a frustration. And lastly, some stuff I've done to the Street 55 were not a necessity, they were a want. I was talking to my buddy Chris yesterday. He's only 4 miles away. He's the guy we're always trading back and forth stuff. He'd been up in the attic in his garage, and he had a very low-mile set of Mickey Thompson Sportsman's bias ply, 29 12.5. The tires on the 5th Street 55 were only 26 inches tall and 12 inches wide. The width was nice. It'll take more width. That car has the spring pockets in the frame. It's a kit you can buy for your Tri-5. And it has, a mini tub that brings the tub in even with the outside of the frame rail. And you can put a pretty big tire under there. 12 inches of rubber clears no problem. Getting it up into the wheel well, that's another story. But so I went and got these tires yesterday morning. I come here last night. I was doing some other work. I was working on the parking brake again. And I decided to mount those tires up because I don't like the looks of the car or the way it drives. It has a 410 gear. The only thing saving it's the overdrive, but a 26-inch tire with a 410 gear is not a good situation. 28 to 30-inch height tire is what I prefer. The closer to 30-inch, the better. So here's a 29 12.5. Wasn't real thrilled about it being a bias ply. But I mounted them up, and I mounted the first one up because while I've been working on it this week, I noticed it has brand new American racing wheels and tires, Cooper Cobra tires on the car. And it has just the pop-in valve stems, so I want to change those. And there's not a wheel weight on the entire car. So the tires, while it didn't really vibrate too much, the tires weren't balanced. So I mounted up the first Mickey Thompson bias ply rear, spun it up on the balancer, and it wanted 2.5 ounces. Now, at 3 ounces, I typically will spin the tire on the wheel, trying to match up if there's a heavy spot. Aluminum wheels typically don't have that much of a heavy spot, like a steel wheel might. So I was happy with the first one. I said, this is good. It looked nice and smooth, just looking at it roll on the machine. I mean, they don't make the Mickey Thompson Sportsman Pros anymore, I don't think. So these things are old. I don't even want to guess how old, but they're in perfect shape. They're not dry rotted, so I wanted to try them. So the first one spun right up, and I put it on the car. Piece of cake. Mount up the second one. Have to swap over the valve stem and everything while I'm doing it. Spin it up, and it wants 6.5 ounces. So I bust it all back down, spin it on the rim, and now it wants 7.5 or 8 ounces. I forget what it said. So I had already cleaned up the inside of the wheels, even though they're brand new. They had spray paint and stuff on them, so a little bit of acetone. The wheel was nice and clean because I knew I was going to be sticking weights on my snap-on manual balancer. Well, it's electronic, but you have to spin it by hand. It does have a brake, which will slow the tire down. You have options. You can put the weights on either side, or you can put them in the middle. I like to put them in the middle. So you go to that setting, and I put the wheel weights as close to the middle of the wheel inside, so you're not looking at wheel weights from the outside. So I mark where it wants the weight, and I line up a half a box of weights, and I get it to spin 0 eventually. Put it all back on the car. Again, they go up over the studs in the wheel, between the drum and the wheel well. I had measured from the wheel to the front on a 55 Tri-5 Chevy. When the rear end's hanging down, the tire gets closer to the front of the wheel well. But I had measured, and I knew that was not going to be a problem, but I didn't anticipate, I know the lip's really low on a 55. Kind of a chore to get them up in there. I had to let the air out of them, squish them up, shove them in there, blow them up. And I took it for a spin. Nice and smooth. I was expecting them to, thump when they're cold, like an old dump truck. I drove dump truck. So I was pretty happy, and geez, I can go 75 miles an hour, and I'm only just barely, not even touching 2,000 RPMs yet. So all around, the gearing is much more how I like it. You can still accelerate just fine, but when you're cruising, you're cruising. I'm trying to take a car that was never designed to turn, go 75, 80 miles an hour at 2,000 RPMs. I want it to be smooth like a new car, or smoother. So I was pretty happy. Brought it back in the shop, and since I fixed the engine leak, the valve covers, engine's dry, transmission's dry, the rear end doesn't have oil blowing back on it all over, but I do notice that the pinion seal is leaking. So this morning, I changed the pinion seal. I once again worked on the parking brake some more, still doesn't work. Decided to go ahead and tackle the front wheels and tires because, again, they haven't been balanced. And they had pop-in valve stems, so I broke those down, put in bolt-in valve stems, balanced those. Took it for a spin. And the car had set on the bias tires all night long. Guess what happens the first 3 or 4 miles? They shake because they're biased. That's why nobody wants a biased tire anymore. But, and I have to quote, if you happen to follow Sean Ellington, also known as Murder Nova, on his YouTube channel, 187 Customs. He doesn't need my shout out, but I cannot take, I like to give credit where credit's due. It's a saying that he has that if you like something, you'll put up with it. He uses more colorful language, but basically he likes the look of a lowered dually pickup. And he'll put up with whatever drawbacks that does to doing that. In my case, I want the wheel well full. I have plenty of room for fat rubber. I don't want a little, tiny tire on the back. The width was fine. The height was dumb. So I'll put up with it for now. Again, they're old stock. They get good tread. I don't know how long they'll even last. So they're on there, and we're going to put up with them. I took it for a spin. A couple miles, you forget about it. It smooths right out. But when you take off, it reminds you. It drives like an old truck. So finally, I think I'm almost done with it. I hope if you followed along this far, what a rambling this has been. The car has a TKO 600. Near as I can tell, it's probably supplied by American Powertrain, maybe through Speedway, because I see they have a kit it has the same cross member this has and everything. And my TKO 500 in my Model A, the shifter is centered, and you can actually unbolt the shifter piece that this bolts to, and you can just flip it around if you want it to be forward or backwards. And they make a kit to move it way forward if you need to, but usually flipping it, it's like 6 bolts, you turn it around, but the hole for the shifter is dead center in the car. The Street 55 has an offset adapter to bring it closer to the seat. And that's the way it is. So when you sit in the car and it had this little short stick, it's actually you're pulling too far back. It's too far back for me anyway. So I stuck a picture in there as well. I had one shifter handle that is actually backwards. You can't tell because it says Hurst either way. But it kind of goes forward, kind of like a Cobra. If you ever look inside a Chevy Cobra, the shifter's kind of laying forward. Well, that's the way it is now. And the shifter's longer. And I just wanted to try something different because I got tired of kind of reaching back. I'd gotten used to the feel of this because if there's a drawback with the TKO 500 or 600, when you shift from second to third, you could go to fifth. The shorter the stick, the better you are. The longer the stick, the more chances of that happening. So I've done it twice since I put the longer handle on it, just goofing around, cruising around. I'm like, if I was actually trying to power shift this thing, I might miss. So I'm going to take this handle now. The offset adapter on the TKO 600 does not have serrations to lock it in, so the guy had welded this tab on there. So it's already been modified. I'm actually going to cut it off, move it ahead slightly, change the angle a little bit, and it'll all be hidden by the boot. So that's left to do. I got the car back in, just sitting behind me, seeing if anything else is going to leak, because I've come this far. I mean, this thing was belching oil when I started, and now I'm to the point where I had one little drip from the pinion. And when it hits the floor, I consider it a leak. If it was just misting on the housing, I might give it time, see what happens. But when it's actually hitting the floor, I consider it a leak. So I think I got that straightened out. That was straightforward. I have lots of 9-inch Ford parts in stock, so that wasn't a problem. Briefly thought about, putting on the 1350 yoke and building a new drive shaft, but I'll do that another day because I'm already a week behind kicking this thing out of the shop. But I'm so close to making it, drivable. I was really happy last night before the weight of the car set on the tires overnight, because the thing was velvety smooth, and I hadn't even bounced the front tires yet. So, but again, once I get past the first few miles, that'll go away. So thanks for following along. If you have come this far on all my ramblings, I'm going to stick some pictures on right now. And enjoy your Sunday. Take care. And now I out-talked it again.